I am Gabriella Mitchell, and at 28, I thought I had finally escaped the toxic dynamics of my family. For years, I had built my life far away from the chaos that once ruled my household. Working in pharmaceutical sales, I traveled often, making a name for myself, growing my career, and bearing the past. But nothing could prepare me for the call that would shake everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and my future. Do you think you deserve that money? That trust fund belongs to Tiffany now. She's better than you'll ever be, my stepmother. Janet's voice pierced through the phone like a sharp blade, dripping with malice. My heart raced as her words settled in. She had emptied my mother's trust fund, the one my mother had left me, a legacy that meant more than just money. But what Janet didn't know was that I was no longer the vulnerable 16-year-old who let her words control me. This time I was ready. As I stared out of my hotel window, everything I'd worked for, everything my mother had built was at risk. But Janet had underestimated me. What she didn't know was that I'd been 2 steps ahead all along, and this time the game was changing. I sat at the edge of the hotel desk, my fingers curling around the cold wood as Janet's words echoed in my mind. My heart pounded violently against my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. You think you deserve that money? That trust fund belongs to Tiffany now. She's better than you'll ever be. The phone line buzzed, her spiteful tone still lingering in the air as I stared at the city skyline through the window. I couldn't help it. My fists clenched, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. I'd been through too much already. I'd survived, and I'd built my life away from her manipulations. But this time, she'd crossed the line. This wasn't just about money. This was about everything my mom had built and everything she'd meant to me. This was my legacy. Thanks for letting me know, I replied flatly, maintaining a level tone as anger bubbled within me, threatening to boil over. My voice betrayed none of the fury building inside. I could almost hear Janet's voice falter, expecting to hear me break down, beg, or plead. But I wouldn't give her that. Not this time. That's all you have to say? She pressed, clearly disappointed at my composed reaction. Tiffany needs that money for her wedding and new house. You're just gonna waste it on your meaningless sales career. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. The audacity, the disrespect. I thought back to my mother, how she'd built her pharmaceutical consulting business from nothing after my father left her. She'd given me everything. A life that was full of promise. A life I was trying to continue. And now this woman, Janet, my stepmother, had the nerve to steal what wasn't even hers. I took a deep breath. The silence on the other end of the phone told me she was waiting for some sort of breakdown from me, but I wasn't going to give her that. Is there anything else? I asked, my voice eerily calm, betraying none of the rage I felt. On the other end, the silence dragged on. She knew. She had no idea that I was 2 steps ahead of her. What she didn't know was that 6 months ago, I had a conversation with Mr. Harrison, my mother's old lawyer. Janet had been making suspicious inquiries about the trust fund, and Mr. Harrison had warned me. Together, we'd set up safeguards. Legal protections that would make any unauthorized access not just impossible, but prosecutable. You've always been such a disappointment, Janet spat, her voice dripping with venom, trying one last time to provoke me. Your stepsister deserves this more than you ever did. I cut the call short. I wasn't going to let her drag me into her web any longer. I wasn't that vulnerable 16-year-old anymore. I was Gabriella Mitchell. I had learned from the best, my mother. And now I had to protect what was mine. I stood in the middle of my hotel room looking at the small photo I always carried of my mother. She was smiling, confident, everything I aspired to be. The woman I could never forget, even after all these years. The trust fund was my safety net, my opportunity to take risks, to build my future the way she'd always wanted me to. But Janet had other plans, and I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I dialed Mr. Harrison's number, my fingers steady despite the anger still coursing through me. When he answered, I cut straight to the point. Janet finally made her move, I said. She claims she's transferred everything to Tiffany. I was expecting this, he replied. I got an alert about attempted access to the account this morning. Don't worry, Gabriella. The additional security measures we put in place worked exactly as planned. Every attempt was logged and documented. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding my breath. So nothing's actually been transferred, not a penny? I asked, needing confirmation. Not a penny, he assured me, but we've got her dead to rights on attempted fraud. The documentation is bulletproof. Would you like me to proceed with the next steps? I thought about everything Janet had done, the years of manipulation, her slow poisoning of my relationship with my dad. She thought she had me cornered, but I wasn't the same person I was at 16. I had a plan. I was ready. Yes, I said firmly. Send the evidence to the family lawyer and copy my dad on everything. I want him to see exactly what his wife tried to do. Mr. Harrison's voice was reassuring. Consider it done, and Gabriella, your mother would be proud. She always said you were smarter than anyone gave you credit for. I closed my laptop and booked an earlier flight home. My client meeting could wait. I had a family matter to attend to, and this time, I would be the one in control. The flight was smooth, but my mind was anything but. Thoughts of Janet's betrayal swirled through my head, and I couldn't wait to confront my father. I was going to put an end to the manipulation, the lies, and the control that she had tried to impose on my family for far too long. When I landed, I immediately hopped into a taxi, eager to get home. As the taxi rolled through the streets, I looked out the window, a sense of calm determination taking hold of me. I was ready for what awaited me. I knew this moment would change everything. But as we neared the exit to my father's neighborhood, something felt off. I checked the address on my phone just to confirm the route, and that's when I realized he wasn't taking me home. Wait a minute. Where are you going? I demanded, panic creeping into my voice. The driver didn't respond, just kept his eyes straight ahead. My heart began to race. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. He was deliberately avoiding my father's house. Stop the car, I shouted, slamming my hand on the back of the seat. I said, stop the car now. The driver only chuckled, his hands tight on the wheel. Not today, lady. You're not going anywhere near that house. Fear and adrenaline hit me in full force. I lunged at the door handle, but it was locked. The taxi sped up, and my heart pounded as I realized I was being taken further away from my destination, not closer. Stop, I screamed, gripping the seat for balance. I needed to get out of here. I had to get to my father. I lunged at the driver, grabbing his wrist in an attempt to wrestle him away from the steering wheel. The car swerved slightly as I fought with him. His grip tightened around the wheel, but I wasn't going to give up that easily. I twisted his arm, forcing him to release the lock on the door. Finally, with one desperate yank, I managed to get the door open. I didn't care if I had to run barefoot. I was done waiting. I shoved the door fully open and jumped out, stumbling onto the street. A taxi was already coming up the block, and without thinking, I sprinted towards it. The driver barely had time to react before I yanked open the door and slid into the back seat. Take me to my father's house, I demanded, voice shaky but determined. The driver didn't question it. He knew better than to argue. As we approached the gates of my father's house, I felt my pulse quicken. This time, there would be no one standing in my way. I approached the gates with the confidence of someone who had already won, but the security guard stepped forward as I reached the entrance, blocking my path. I'm sorry, miss, but your father isn't home right now, he said smoothly. He's out of town for the evening. Maybe you should come back tomorrow. I froze for a moment, disbelief flooding my system. Janet's grip was tightening in every possible way. She knew that if she could keep me from my father, she could control everything. No, I'm going in, I said, my voice ice cold. Now let me through. The guard hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do. I could see the doubt in his eyes as he shifted on his feet. I'm sorry, miss. He repeated, but I could see the way his gaze flickered. He was lying. He was protecting something or someone on the other side of those gates. Let me in now, I said again, more forcefully this time, stepping closer to the gate. I wasn't going to let anything stop me. Not this time. I'd spent too many years being manipulated, too many years letting Janet have her way. It ended tonight. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and marched toward the front door, the gate now open enough to allow me entry. The guard's voice called out behind me, but I didn't stop. I was finally taking control. I walked into the living room to find my dad, Janet, and Tiffany. The moment Janet saw me, her smug smile faltered, replaced by confusion as she took in my calm demeanor. Gabriella, my dad said, his voice filled with concern. I didn't expect you until later. Is everything okay? I pulled out my phone and the file Mr. Harrison had sent me the day before. Actually, Dad, we need to talk, I said. Janet's face went pale. I was just trying to help Tiffany, she started to protest, but I wasn't having it. Every attempt you made to access the account was documented. Every call, every forged signature, every manipulation. It's all here, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. I handed my dad the file. His hands shook as he read through the papers. His expression darkened with every page. Janet, what did you do? His voice was barely a whisper. She's lying, Tiffany jumped in, her face flushed. She's always been jealous of me. I pulled out another document, the complete trust fund statement. The money's still there, safe and untouched. Janet's attempts to transfer it failed because I was warned about her plans months ago. I took precautions. Precautions? Janet spat. You set me up! No, I replied calmly. I protected what was mine, just like my mom taught me to do. The silence in the room was deafening as my dad read through each document. Each manipulative email Janet had sent to the bank, every forged signature attempt. It was all laid bare in front of him. I did this for our family, Janet protested, but her voice was shaky now. Tiffany needed... Stop, my dad's voice cracked. Just stop, Janet. His voice was quiet but firm. You tried to steal from my daughter. You forged my signature. You've been lying to me for years. Tiffany started crying, but these weren't her usual manipulative tears. She looked genuinely shocked. Maybe she was finally starting to realize the gravity of what her mother had tried to do. The police will want to talk to you, I said, my voice steady. Mr. Harrison has already filed the reports. The bank fraud department is involved now. You planned this, Janet hissed, her face twisted with anger. You knew I would try to access the trust fund. No, Janet, I said coldly. You planned this. I just made sure I was ready when you did. I turned to my dad. There's more. Mr. Harrison found evidence that she's been skimming money from your account too. Small amounts, building up over years. My dad sank back into his chair, looking devastated. A pang of guilt twisted in my stomach, but he needed to know the truth. Get out, my dad repeated to Janet. Both of you, I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce. As Janet and Tiffany gathered their things, throwing accusations and tears around in equal measure, I stood quietly by the window, watching them leave. The same window I used to look out of when I waited for my mom to come home from work. I could almost hear her voice in my mind, always telling me, be prepared, sweetheart. Never let anyone take what's rightfully yours. The room was still heavy with silence after Janet and Tiffany stormed out, leaving a trail of bitterness behind them. I turned to my dad, who was slumped in his chair, still holding the documents. His face was pale, and for a moment I saw the weight of years of guilt and regret etched deeply in his features. I'm sorry, Gabriella, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I should have seen this sooner. I should have known what was going on with Janet, but I didn't want to believe it. After your mom died, I was just trying to hold everything together. I walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You didn't fail me, Dad. You were manipulated, just like I was. But now we know the truth. I gave him a soft smile, trying to reassure him despite the flood of emotions that churned inside me. We'll fix this together. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something he hadn't shown in years. Guilt, relief, and gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you, Gabriella. Your mom always said you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for. Now I see it too. The weight of everything that had happened started to settle into my bones. This wasn't just about the trust fund or the money. This was about the lies, the years of manipulation, and the damage done to my relationship with my dad. But it was also about reclaiming what was mine, my inheritance, my legacy, and the future my mom had worked so hard to build for me. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The reality of the situation was sinking in. The truth had finally come out, but the road ahead was still long. The following days moved quickly. Mr. Harrison worked tirelessly to move the legal process forward. Janet's lawyer was doing everything they could to protect her, but the evidence was too damning. She had overplayed her hand, and now the truth would come to light, no matter how hard she fought against it. I spent the next few days going through all the business records my mom had left behind. It wasn't just the trust fund that had to be protected. It was her life's work, her business, her legacy. My hands shook as I sifted through the contracts and the plans she had made for me. She had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. It was time to prove that I was capable of carrying her torch. It wasn't just about standing up to Janet anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for everything my mom had worked so hard to create. I couldn't let her vision fall apart because of someone like Janet. I had to prove that I was worthy of my mom's legacy, and I wasn't going to let anything stand in my way. A few weeks later, I found myself in my office, standing over a conference table with my team. The consulting firm I had started with the money from my mom's trust fund was starting to take shape. It was small, but it was growing, and it was becoming something that I could truly be proud of. My team, Sarah, who reminded me so much of my mom, and the rest of our talented group, was helping pharmaceutical companies streamline their operations, just like my mom had once done. It felt good to finally be in control. The weight of the past still lingered, but I was moving forward. I wasn't just a survivor of my family's toxic drama. I was a businesswoman, a leader, someone who could make decisions, build something real, and stand on my own 2 feet. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Mr. Harrison. "Gabriella," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I wanted to let you know that we've completed the final steps in the legal proceedings. Janet is facing charges of attempted fraud, financial exploitation, and forgery. The police have filed their reports, and they're moving forward with an investigation into her actions. It's over." I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I can't tell you how much this means to me, not just for the business, but for everything my mom worked for." "Your mother would be proud of you, Gabriella," he said. "She always believed in you, and now you're showing the world exactly why she did." A few weeks after the legal proceedings, I was sitting in my dad's kitchen, the place where we'd shared so many memories, both good and bad. My dad and I had started talking again, after years of silence and tension. We shared lunch once a week, and little by little, our relationship was healing. He was finally starting to see things clearly, and so was I. "I've been thinking about what your mom used to say," my dad said, looking across the table at me. "She used to tell me that you were like a diamond. The more pressure you got, the stronger you became." I think she was right. I smiled softly. I always thought I was just a little like her. But now I see it too. I've become her, in a way, stronger than I ever imagined. "I'm proud of you, Gabriella," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been more supportive. I should have seen what was happening. But now I see you, and I see your mom's legacy in everything you do. I'm proud to call you my daughter." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when everything came full circle. The years of manipulation, the pain, the struggle, it all led me here. And now I was stronger than I'd ever been before. A year passed, and things began to change. My consulting firm grew, and I was recognized as a leader in my field. I hired more employees, expanded into new markets, and began making a name for myself. But through it all, I never forgot the lessons my mom had taught me. The trust fund wasn't just money. It was a symbol of my mom's belief in me, a symbol of her love, her hard work, and her desire for me to succeed. Every decision I made, every step I took in my business carried echoes of her wisdom. One day, while sorting through old business papers in my office, I found a letter from my mom dated just weeks before her passing. It was addressed to me. "My dearest Gabriella, I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you the freedom to choose your path. Don't let anyone dim your light or tell you what you deserve. You're stronger than you know, smarter than they give you credit for, and capable of anything you set your mind to. Trust yourself." "I do. Love, Mom." Tears filled my eyes as I read the letter. This was the final gift she had given me. The trust fund wasn't just a financial cushion. It was a reminder of everything she had hoped for me, and I was living up to that promise every single day. Boom. My dad retired from his job and started volunteering at a grief counseling center, helping others cope with loss. He was finally starting to heal from the pain that had consumed him for so long, and we were healing together one step at a time. Sometimes he would come to my office for lunch, and we would talk about the future, about my business, about Mom. Those conversations were healing in their own way. Slowly, we were starting to rebuild the relationship that had been lost. As I look back on everything that had happened, I realized that the hardest lesson I had learned wasn't about money, betrayal, or even the trust fund. It was about standing up for myself. My mom knew that one day I would need to fight for what was mine, and she made sure I had the tools to do it. I was my mother's daughter, and nothing, not even Janet's betrayal, could take that away from me. That's when I truly understood. Life was never about being tough. It was about being prepared, and I was ready for whatever came next. As I sat in my office looking out over the city skyline, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. My business was growing, my relationships were healing, and I had finally taken control of my life in a way I hadn't even known was possible. The weight of everything that had happened, my mother's passing, the betrayal from Janet, the manipulation I had suffered, was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. I was stronger now, not just because of the challenges I'd overcome, but because I had learned to stand firm in my beliefs. I looked down at the framed letter from my mom, still sitting on my desk. It had become my guiding principle, my reminder to stay true to myself, no matter how hard life tried to knock me down. She had given me more than just money. She had given me the courage to fight for what was mine and the wisdom to know when to let go. Her lessons were woven into every decision I made. But as content as I was, I couldn't ignore the consequences that awaited Janet. Despite everything she had tried to do, her lies, her manipulation, her attempts to take what wasn't hers, she hadn't anticipated how far I was willing to go to protect what was rightfully mine. I'd already filed the necessary documents to take control of the estate. Janet was facing legal consequences for her fraudulent actions, and I knew that she would eventually have to face the truth of her deceit. There was no escape from the damage she'd caused, both to me and to herself. But even as I looked ahead at the future, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness for her. She had allowed greed and jealousy to consume her, and in the end, she had lost everything. There would be no happy ending for her, no redemption. She had pushed away everything and everyone who could have loved her, and now she was left with nothing but her own bitterness. As for me, I wasn't going to let her darkness define me. I had worked too hard, learned too much, and fought for too long to let anything pull me back down. My dad, once lost in his own grief, was starting to see the light again. I could see it in his eyes. The same pride he had for me when I was a little girl, the pride he had when I finished college, when I built my career. Now as we sat together, rebuilding our relationship, I knew we were moving forward, not as a broken family, but as one that had learned to rebuild. As I reflected on everything, I felt my phone vibrate. It was an email from Mr. Harrison with a message that was exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. Gabriella, you've done it. You've protected your mother's legacy. I always knew you had it in you. I smiled, feeling the familiar warmth of his support. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. Life had taught me that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about the money or the success. They're about standing up for yourself, being true to who you are, and not letting others take what you've earned. I'd learned to be patient, to trust in myself, and to let go of what didn't serve me. But as for Janet, well, she would have to face the consequences of her actions. And while I felt no joy in that, I knew it was the only way for her to learn. There would be no more manipulation, no more lies, and no more attempts to tear my family apart. The truth had won, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Now it was my turn to move forward. I had my business, my legacy, and my father by my side. And no one, no matter how hard they tried, could take that from me. But what do you think of the journey Gabriella has taken? How do you think she will continue to grow in the future? What do you think the consequences for Janet should be? Let me know in the comments below and feel free to share your thoughts. I'd love to hear your opinions.